So Robert Harding, the CIO of Capital One Bank here in the UK, and also Patrick Eltridge, CIO of RBS. Also have two Chief Innovation Officers, Anju Patwardhan from Standard Chartered and Peter Jackson from Santander. So, we all saw the headlines this morning. Tough times coming in the banking world, we think, in the city here. What does that mean to innovation? Does that mean innovation is optional and it's something we're going to cut back and focus on the core business? Or is it time to double down and really reinvest in innovation? Patrick?
Well, I think it's quite obvious for all of us. It's the innovation doubling down, I think, has probably already started and it's got to continue. I think in times like this, I don't think the startups are going to stop. You might have different trends around funding and so on cycling, but I think the big banks like us are going to continue to take it as deeply seriously as we already are.
Okay. Others?
I think anything that encourages us to reimagine our businesses is a good thing for our customers in the long run. So I think this is just yet another transition for the market as a whole.
Okay. But isn't it a challenge? I mean, we've got to focus on this quarter's earnings and our real customers buying real products today, and some of the things we're investing in and exploring are probably not going to pay off for a while. How do we make that pay off, Peter?
Well, I mean, I think the way we've chosen to organise ourselves at Santander is we have folks who are focused on delivery in our 10 key markets around the world. I'm very focused on helping support them with innovation. I think there's a great example here in the UK of the work we've done with Cabbage, which is a business we've invested in through our Innoventures fund. And actually we've partnered with them to bring a service to offer lending to SMEs in sort of 6 or 7 minutes here in the UK. I think it's a great service and a great example of how we can do things outside of the sort of here and now.
I would agree with that. I think banking is an entirely digital business, and innovation allows us to look for opportunities to find business solutions, whether it's revenue enhancement or whether it's business efficiency, credit risk mitigation, fraud risk mitigation. There's so many ways that we can deal with our existing business challenges. So to me, innovation is about re-architecting banking.
So at the same time, there's been a lot of high-profile departures and people really leaving to go start new fintechs or join others that are starting to scale up. And the talk of this panel is about innovating in a ring-fence environment. Is it easier to do outside of the ring-fence environment? I mean, that's got to be part of the appeal. How do we address that?
I mean, I think, for me, fundamentally, I believe people come to work to create things, whatever business they're in. I think it's just, you have to be slightly more deliberate in larger organizations to help people get from connect the customer and the idea together. But I don't think it's fundamentally harder or easier to do it inside or outside. I think you just have to be deliberate about how you create that path from your idea to your customers.
Okay.
I would agree with that. I mean, there are challenges trying to innovate within large organizations, but then there are ways to deal with it. So for us, for example, we have an innovation outpost in San Francisco, and we've complemented that with an innovation lab in Singapore. So the San Francisco team is very good at identifying technology partners, solutions, monitoring trends, whereas the Singapore team now works with our business partners and with the stakeholders from different parts of the bank, such as legal or compliance or information security, to translate some of that into prototypes or into POCs. And I think I would add that, regardless of whether innovation is happening within the bank or it's happening outside, it is a symbiotic relationship between banks and technology companies, and ultimately the winner is the customer, no matter where the solution comes from.
Yeah, that said, I think we have a lot to do to become faster internally and easier to do business with, easier to partner with. And that's one of the things we're focusing on enormously, through full end-to-end adoption of agile practices and DevOps tooling and automation and simplification internally, use of the cloud. We're focusing on cycle time. Similarly, we've got our innovation centres in California and in Gogarburn and London as well, and the partnership is very strong. And we're learning intensely, as rapidly as we can, how to speed up internally, whether it's working with somebody big like Apple to get things like Touch ID and Apple Pay out, or something small our smaller partners with some of their more innovative niche solutions, the easy part, the thing that the big companies can do is to be able to address a much more complex proposition to a large number of customers. And that's why it's a great synergistic partnership, as Anju says.
Well, certainly the ability to scale is better inside, right? You've got existing customers buying existing products, existing revenue streams, so be able to offer new solutions and new opportunities to them is much greater than three guys in a garage trying to reach scale, right? But at the same time, we have this push-pull of the internal organization and the pull of the past and the legacy infrastructures. I mean, you're pretty new to your role in Santander, Peter. I often frame it in terms of, we call them trailblazers and traditionalists. The bank's full of traditionalists, and you're a bit of a trailblazer coming in from the outside. How do you make that whole thing work?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting for me rejoining a big financial services business. I've been out of the financial services space for last 5 or 6 years. And coming back, one of my observations is a lot's changed, but not a lot's changed. And I think some of the stuff that people were talking about 5 or 6 years ago, they're still talking about now. I think what's begun to change is that banks are beginning to realize they do need to partner with a lot of these smaller, sort of more boutique-type firms who are focused on solving particular issues, whether that's technology partners or indeed some of these sort of FinTech companies like we just did with Cabbage. I guess there is a big cultural challenge in the business. I see this in the room. I guess if I look at all the people with suits, you probably work for banks, and the people who aren't in suits probably don't. It might be harsh, but it probably would be fair. And some of those small things are actually quite important. I think culturally, those types of things are important in terms of bringing the right talent into the business, taking the right types of risks, being prepared to try things and seeing them fail, and that being okay. Those things are all really important. And getting over the hump of some of those issues is what's going to be really important for the big banks to move on and start really focusing on delivering for customers, which is, I think, the core of what we all need to do.
I would add one more thing to that. I think the last 12 months, we've seen a significant shift in the regulatory environment in many of our markets. UK perhaps takes the lead, but in many other countries, the regulators are very progressive, and they've started partnering with the banks, and they've started asking the banks on how can they support innovation in their countries. And that's been very helpful. That's really been a game changer for us in terms of thinking of innovation and trying to solve for some of the big issues at an industry level.
So innovation is always going to lead regulation. If we get to the point where it's the other way around, we're probably really in big trouble. But if you had one wish list for that, I mean, what do you hope that the regulators around the world will do to be able to facilitate innovation in financial services?
Well, if you asked me, it wouldn't be one, it would be a longer list than that. But I think the one area where it's very helpful is, which FCA is doing and MAS is also doing, is to create a regulatory sandbox environment where the banks can collaborate with each other and can partner with external fintech companies, can share data with each other and try and solve some of the bigger problems which they cannot solve on their own. Now, whether that's retail KYC, whether it's cyber reliance, whether it's on the financial markets, that would be the number one thing on my wish list from an infrastructure perspective.
Reactions to that?
I think early engagement with a mindset around experimentation and learning is going to be critical for the regulators. If they expect every conversation with us about a new technology or a new product and service to be all finished, tied up with a bow around it and everything perfect, that will become frustrating for both parties, I think. But if we can have early dialogue about what we'd like to try, how we'd like to experiment, how we want to work with our customers in this way, and they evolve and learn as we are learning.
But yet that is our legacy, right? And that's the hallmark of a traditionalist. So they want to master the known knowns and enforce best practices, where the trailblazers want to explore the unknown and establish next practices. And the regulatory ring fence is part of what makes that really hard. I mean, how did you guys make the transition at RBS? Or have you made the transition? It's probably still underway, I'm guessing.
Oh, it's still underway in that it's continuing to change and evolve, but I think we are over the hard hump of it, and I think it goes a long way towards our the culture and the sense of common purpose inside the organisation. We have federated into our business franchises a lot of things like our digital labs, but they build solutions based on industrial strength, secure platforms that the central team creates, but they're localized by the people who are closest to the customers. Things like that. That's just one small example where we want the best of both worlds. It needs to be industrial strength, scale, it needs to work, it needs to be secure, but it's got to be local as well. We want to make a large bank feel like a small bank.
Well, it's got to be doubly challenging for you and Robert in a CIO role, well, where part of your job is run the bank, right? 100% uptime and everything just works. And at the same time, there's an initiative to change the bank, which is maybe exactly the role for Peter and Anju. So, I mean, Robert, how do you guys balance that at Capital One?
I mean, for me, that's what makes the role exciting. But you're right, it does create complexity in the role, in that your platform to go out and do some of the more innovative things is on some level defined by the level of stability that you're bringing to the organization as well. But from my perspective, in a way, that keeps you honest. I mean, I make sure I sit with the teams that are running the technology operation just so that I can see the impact, both good and bad sometimes, of some of the more innovative things we do. And, as with all things in life, it's just about balance and making good risk-based decisions and thinking about what is right for the customer and then sort of working back from that.
Okay. So Peter, let me ask you a little bit of a different question, and that is, it's one thing to say innovation is my job, and we're looking at things that are maybe out there and something that will come to the fray several quarters out. How do you actually make that transition? Because I think that's what's really critical, right? It's not just run the bank today and think up some cool stuff for 10 years from now. How do you actually bring those new things into market so that they become meaningful in a couple of quarters and meaningful for the shareholders?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit on one of the biggest challenges I think that all of the big banks face, which is how do we bridge from where we are to where we want to get to. We have a team called Innoventures where we make investments in not early stage but late stage tech businesses that we can see opportunities to partner with them to bring some services back into our business. Typically what we try and do is we look at it on a country by country basis, and we can identify needs that we have from a customer perspective where we know that our existing products and services aren't up to scratch. We like to work with Innoventures if we can invest in a third party and bring that service into the country and launch it there. I mentioned Cabbage earlier, which is a great example of that, and we've got some others in the pipeline that we'll come out with over the next few months. That's one model we use, which is the partner model. It's much harder to make the to build some of these new services internally in the bank. Some of the challenges that we all face are there in the organization, but it's an area that we're looking to work with as well. And we have to try lots of these things, and we have to accept that some of them aren't going to work. And that's quite difficult for banks to deal with, right? But and that's part of the change in mindset that we need to see across the organisation. But ultimately, one of the benefits for us at Santander is we operate in 10 markets, and we can actually try things out in one country. So we can do something innovative around payroll in Mexico. And if it works, we can then roll it into other countries for us in Latin America. And it's a real advantage to our model and the opportunity for you to partner with us that we can use our scale like that. And I think that it makes it unique to work with us. I think Stan Charter are similar. But for some of the more domestic focused businesses, it's a bigger leap into the unknown if you try and do something just in your own core market.
Also, in most industries, and I think banking is no different, disruptive innovation is probably 10% of everything that gets done. A large chunk of it is in your core processes and in adjacent areas, and I think that's true of banks as well. There is so much that can be done even within our core processes and different segments, different functions, that one doesn't have to just focus on the disruptive innovation part.
So are you satisfied if all there is sustaining innovation, or do you want to see that 10% or whatever the mix is in something disruptive?
I think it's harder for that 10% to come from within the organization. A lot of that comes from outside, and that's where partnerships are valuable. Collaboration helps.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, can banks truly be product innovation leaders?
I think yes. I think it's just important for banks to understand where their core strengths are and just make sure that they're innovating on a kind of defined set of vectors. I don't think you can win on all fronts, but I think you can be leaders on particular vectors. You just have to play to your kind of existing strengths and go forward on that basis.
I think they can't do it on their own, but they can absolutely, drive it, be part of it quite vibrantly. They've got to be one of the things we've all got to do more of is become active participants in a public API ecosystem. You know, we've got an initiative where we want to be known as the Bank of APIs, and we're
you and a few others.
Yeah, I know. Well, but it's important. It's really important. You know, we're running hackathons all over the world at the moment, trialing our banking APIs in a closed sandbox environment and learning from them and changing and evolving and seeing how real-world developers of niche applications want to use and consume public banking APIs. So we've got to get much better at that.
Do you think that dream will be realized, where the Bank of the Future is really a platform and a plug-and-play API environment? I mean, we're clearly not there today, but a lot of people are talking about it.
We are much closer than people realize. It's already happening to imminent.
Anju, are the regulators ready for that?
The regulators are definitely ready for that. In fact, in Singapore, the regulator held a conference a couple of weeks ago, and it was called the API conference, where they invited all the banks and they invited people from the industry to come and share knowledge and information with each other, and they were pushing the banks to start thinking in that direction.
Yeah. So Peter, as we wrap up here, what advice do you have for startups that want to work with banks? I mean, what do they need to do to be really ready to be a partner with you?
I think there's some great opportunities for startups to work with the banking industry. You know, let's face it, we're not, we haven't historically always been the most innovative set of businesses, and actually finding people who can bring great services and ideas to us is really important. The challenge for the bank is to make sure we don't squash those great ideas, right? And I think making sure that you pick the right partners who can help you flourish is really important. And that's probably the most important thing I'd ask you to think about is find the right partners to work with. There's lots of choice out there, and finding someone who can give you this sort of access to the right global scale is probably the most important thing to do.
Well, I think you're right, because those traditionalists carried out to their extreme become what we call the business prevention department. Don't worry, somebody came in here with an idea, but I got rid of them. We won't hear about them again. So hopefully that's not what the future looks like. So please join me in thanking our entire panel. So.